Imagine waking up tomorrow morning, walking to the bathroom, and looking in the mirror. You recognize the face staring back at you. You can see the eyes, the mouth, the hair. You can reach up and touch your skin, feeling the warmth of your own body. But you feel nothing. Not emptiness, not depression, but a total, absolute void of recognition. Your brain tells you that the creature in the glass is dead. You check your pulse, and you feel the thumping, but you interpret it not as a sign of life, but as the mechanical twitching of a corpse that has not realized it expired yet. This is not a ghost story. This is a glitch in the human brain known as Cotard's delusion, a condition that proves being alive is not a biological fact. It is a hallucination that your brain maintains to keep you sane. The horror of this condition lies not in the hallucination of monsters or demons, but in the subtraction of the self, a terrifying erosion where the sufferer becomes a conscious observer of their own decomposition. It is a state of existence where the fundamental axiom of I think, therefore I am, is violently severed, replaced by a cold, unyielding conviction that you are merely a ghost trapped in a rotting meat suit. Patients do not merely suspect they are dead. They feel the absence of life with the same sensory certainty that you feel the chair beneath you or the air in your lungs. They might complain that their blood has stopped flowing, that their heart has calcified into a cold stone, or that their internal organs have liquefied and are slowly putrefying inside a hollow torso. It is a profound existential isolation, a belief that they have been exiled from the collective reality of the living and left stranded in a purgatory where they can walk and talk, yet do not truly exist. The logic of the outside world, the medical tests, and the pleading of loved ones shatter against the ironclad wall of their perception, because to them, the world of the living is the illusion, and their death is the only absolute truth. To understand the origins of this nightmare, we must travel back to the gas-lit wards of Paris in 1880, where the neurologist Jules Cotard encountered a patient who would become the archetype for the disorder. In the medical literature, she is known only as Mademoiselle X, a woman who arrived at the hospital not seeking a cure for an illness, but seeking confirmation of her own non-existence. She presented a laundry list of impossibilities to the doctors, stating with absolute seriousness that she had no brain, no nerves, no chest, and no stomach. In her mind, her body had been hollowed out, leaving only a desiccated shell of skin and bone that was somehow, miraculously, still moving through the world. This was not a metaphorical expression of grief or a poetic description of depression. It was a literal, physical claim about her anatomy that she believed superseded the evidence of her own pulse. Mademoiselle X's delusion extended beyond the physical and into the theological, as she believed that because she had no soul and no body, she was incapable of dying a natural death. She existed in a state of eternal damnation, a cursed object that God had simply forgotten to remove from the board, leaving her to wander the earth indefinitely. Consequently, she demanded not to be buried when her time came, but to be burned, claiming that fire was the only force capable of destroying a thing that did not technically exist. The tragedy of her condition was that her belief in her own lack of a stomach led to a refusal to eat, as she saw no point in putting food into a void where organs used to be. The doctors tried to reason with her. They tried to force-feed her, but her brain had rewritten her reality so thoroughly that the concept of nutrition became absurd to her. Eventually, the prophecy she wrote for herself came true, and Mademoiselle X died of starvation, perishing from the very biological needs she was convinced she no longer possessed. Her case opened a dark door in the study of the human mind, revealing that our sense of aliveness is not a default setting, but a complex construct that can be dismantled piece by piece. For decades, Mademoiselle X was viewed as a curiosity, a singular anomaly in the history of madness, until modern neuroscience began to map the intricate wiring that generates our sense of self. We now understand that what happened to her, And what happens to modern sufferers of Cotard delusion is a catastrophic failure of the communication lines between two very specific regions of the brain. It is a mechanical breakage that reveals just how fragile our grip on reality actually is, proving that we are all just one bad neural connection away from believing we are walking corpses. The mechanism behind this living death is believed to be a severe disconnection between the fusiform gyrus, the area of the brain responsible for recognizing faces, and the amygdala, the primitive center that processes emotion. In a healthy brain, when you look in the mirror or see a loved one, the visual data travels from your eyes to the fusiform gyrus, which identifies the image and then signals the amygdala to release a microdose of emotional familiarity. You feel a warmth, a sense of me-ness, or a spark of recognition that tells you the person in the reflection is you and that you're a part of this world. It is a subtle, automatic feedback loop that anchors you to your identity, a constant emotional hum that underscores every interaction you have with yourself. But in patients with Cotard, that wire is cut, and the visual information arrives at the amygdala only to be met with total, terrifying silence. To understand the severity of this disconnection, it is helpful to look at its neurological twin, the Cotard delusion, which stems from a similar glitch but manifests in an outwardly projected direction. In Cotard, the patient looks at their mother or their spouse and recognizes the face perfectly, but because the emotional connection is severed, they feel nothing. The brain, struggling to reconcile the visual identity with the lack of emotional warmth, creates a logical, albeit paranoid, explanation. This person looks exactly like my mother, but I feel no love for her. Therefore, she must be an imposter. They believe their loved ones have been replaced by identical clones, aliens, or government agents, because that is the only story that fits the conflicting data. The logic is sound, even if the premise is insane. The brain is simply trying to make sense of a sensory error. Cotard delusion is the introverted, horrific inverse of this same process, where the imposter is not the person standing in front of you, but the person living inside your skin. When a Cotard patient looks in the mirror, they see their own face, but they receive zero emotional feedback, no sense of familiarity, and no spark of life. The brain, desperate to explain why it feels absolutely nothing for the being it inhabits, runs the same logical calculation as the Cotard patient, but turns the conclusion inward. I recognize this body, but I feel no connection to it. I feel no life within it, therefore I must be dead. It is a rationalization of an impossible feeling, a story the brain tells itself to explain the sudden, total absence of the self. The true horror of this condition is that human reason is entirely subservient to human emotion. You cannot logic your way out of a feeling that is not there. You can hold the patient's hand against their chest, let them feel the rhythmic thumping of their heart, and show them the condensation of their breath on a mirror, but it changes nothing. To them, the heartbeat is just a mechanical spasm, a residual twitch of a machine that has been turned off, and the breath is just escaping gas from a decomposing form. The intellectual understanding of biology cannot override the visceral, emotional truth that the amygdala provides, proving that we do not believe we are alive because of evidence, but because we feel alive. When that feeling is extinguished, the evidence becomes irrelevant, and the sufferer is left to wander through a world of ghosts, trapped in a nightmare where the only way to prove they exist is to die. This condition presents a violent challenge to the foundational bedrock of Western philosophy, specifically the famous axiom posited by René Descartes, cogito, ergo sum, or I think, therefore I am. Descartes argued that the very act of doubting one's existence proves that a doubter exists, establishing consciousness as the undeniable proof of life. Yet, patients with Cotard delusion dismantle this logic effortlessly, for they are fully capable of thinking, speaking, and reasoning with high intelligence, all while maintaining the absolute conviction that they do not exist. They can solve complex math problems, play chess, and articulate their despair with poetic clarity, demonstrating that their cognitive faculties are intact even as their ontological status has collapsed. This suggests that the sense of being is not an intellectual conclusion derived from logic, but a visceral feeling generated by the limbic system. We do not know we are alive because we think we know we are alive because we feel a continuous background hum of emotional connectivity that these patients have lost. To understand their internal reality, imagine a pilot sitting in the cockpit of a sophisticated aircraft that is cruising smoothly at 30,000 feet. The view out the window shows the clouds and the sun, and the stick responds to the pilot's touch, indicating that the plane is flying perfectly. However, every single gauge on the dashboard, the altimeter, the fuel, the speed, the engine temperature, reads absolute zero. The pilot is trapped in a terrifying dissonance where the external evidence suggests flight, but the internal machinery insists on a crash. In this metaphor, the pilot is the conscious mind, and the gauges are the emotional centers of the brain. When the gauges fail, the human mind will almost always trust the machine over the window. The Cotard patient is flying a plane that their brain insists is a heap of smoking wreckage on the ground, and no amount of pointing at the clouds can convince them otherwise. This separation between the mind and the biology it inhabits often leads to a linguistic shift that is as fascinating as it is disturbing, where the patient stops using the word I. They begin to dissociate from their own physical form, referring to themselves in the third person or, more chillingly, as it. The body becomes an object, a cumbersome piece of furniture that the consciousness is forced to drag around, a rotting cage that refuses to release its prisoner. They might pinch their own skin and feel the pain, but they interpret it as a mechanical signal firing in a dead nerve, a phantom sensation in a limb that should have been buried weeks ago. They are ghosts haunting their own houses, watching through the windows of their eyes as a corpse goes through the motions of eating, sleeping, and speaking to doctors. So, where does that leave you, the observer sitting comfortably in your chair, confident in the knowledge that you are a living, breathing entity? You must realize that your certainty of life is based on nothing more than the same chemical mixture that failed in Mademoiselle X. You do not have a soul that anchors you to this plane of existence. You have a fragile loop of neurons connecting your visual cortex to your amygdala, providing you with that warm, reassuring lie that says, I am here. If that wire were to snap, your logic would not save you, and your memories would not protect you from the void. You are relying on a wet, biological computer to constantly reaffirm your existence. And as we have seen, that computer is prone to errors that defy all reason. This is not a horror story about crazy people that you can observe from a safe distance. It is a warning about the precarious nature of your own consciousness. A minor stroke, a viral infection, or a traumatic brain injury could sever that connection in your head tomorrow morning, and you would wake up in the same nightmare. You would look in a mirror and see a stranger. You would touch your chest and feel a stone. You would scream for help and believe that the sound was coming from a grave. We walk through life assuming that being alive is a biological fact, undeniable and concrete, but Cotard's delusion proves that it is merely a story the brain tells itself. We are only real as long as our minds decide to maintain the illusion, and we are all just one glitch away from becoming ghosts.